I paid $10,000 a month for their Whims, but my family tried to wipe me off the face of the earth after I outshone my brothers and sisters, and then they begged for mercy and… So, here's the deal. My name's Nathan, and I'm 32. I've always been the quiet one in the family. My parents used to joke about it, calling me their little thinker, which sounds sweet until you realize that in a family as chaotic as mine, quiet translates to forgotten. My siblings, Lily, 35, Josh, 29, and Madison, 25, were always the louder, more demanding ones. They always had big dreams, expensive tastes, and endless needs. And somehow, I always found myself in the background, watching them take center stage. Growing up, I wasn't the kid anyone expected much from. I was just there. Not that I'm saying I was neglected or mistreated. I got by fine. I was just quietly pushed to the sidelines, while my siblings demanded the spotlight. Lily, the eldest, was the first in the family to really make it. She became a financial planner and let everyone know how successful she was. Josh, the charismatic one, had this wild entrepreneurial streak and a list of business ideas longer than a CVS receipt. Madison, the youngest, was the artist, always full of big dreams, but rarely any follow-through. Me? I was just the nerdy brother who got good grades, went to college, and graduated quietly while everyone clapped louder for the others. After college, though, I decided to do things my own way. I took a few risks, invested carefully, and eventually built up a business, mostly tech-based, which might sound boring, but it turned out to be lucrative. I didn't tell my family much. I'd learned early on that it was easier to keep things quiet around them. I figured there wasn't much point in bragging, especially since I was, well, me, the quiet one. Eventually, I started making enough money that I could help them out here and there. At first, it was little things, covering a car payment for Josh, paying a few months of rent for Madison. It felt good, like I was finally contributing something they couldn't ignore. And slowly, it grew. As my business took off, so did the monthly help I sent them. By the time I was 30, I was sending nearly $10,000 a month to help cover their whims, debts, and bills. I didn't need much for myself, and I thought maybe, just maybe, this would make me feel like I belonged, like I was truly valued in the family. But that's where I made my first mistake. It started subtly. At family dinners, there were quiet, almost pitying glances whenever I talked about work. Lily would always find a way to slip in comments about how finance was the true moneymaker, dismissing tech as a fad. Josh would shrug and mumble about how he couldn't imagine doing something so steady. Madison, sweet as she was, just nodded with vague interest, quickly switching the conversation to her next art project. I told myself it didn't matter. I was used to being overlooked. I thought, let them think what they want. I know my worth. Then, a few months ago, everything changed. My business hit a major milestone, a big acquisition that pretty much secured my financial future. It was huge for me, a game changer. My initial thought? I'd finally done something they couldn't brush off. Maybe, for once, they'd actually be proud. So, at the next family dinner, I brought it up casually. Hey, I've got some big news. We just closed a deal that puts us on the map in the tech world. Silence. My parents exchanged glances. My siblings barely looked up from their phones. Lily was the first to break the silence, saying, "That's nice, Nathan. But you know, finance is still the real backbone of the economy. What's tech without someone to manage it?" I laughed it off, trying to shrug it away, but then Josh chimed in, "Yeah, cool and all, but I just don't get how someone can be proud of working in a field with zero social value." Madison just nodded, saying something about how she's not really into corporate stuff. I felt a flush of embarrassment. Here I was, genuinely proud for once, and they'd managed to belittle it in a few quick comments. I tried to let it go, but the hurt stuck with me. The entitlement started building after that night. It was like, suddenly, my monthly contributions weren't a gift, they were an obligation. My parents even pulled me aside a few days later, gently suggesting I consider setting up a proper monthly fund for the family's needs. My mom went as far as to say, you know, Nathan, with all your success, it's important to take care of your family. Lily and Josh are under a lot of pressure. And Madison, well, Her art isn't exactly paying the bills. That line hit me hard. Take care of your family? Wasn't that what I'd been doing all along? And since when did I become the bank for everyone's personal dreams? The monthly allowance had started as an act of kindness, but now it felt like I was expected to pay for their lifestyles. The real blow came about 2 weeks later. I was out with friends, feeling good for once, when my phone buzzed with a text from Lily. Can you cover Josh's credit card this month? He's struggling with his new business venture. When I replied that I was already contributing more than enough, she hit me back with a text that I still can't believe. She wrote, "You wouldn't even have that money if it weren't for all the support we gave you growing up. Don't forget who helped make you." I sat there, stunned, replaying her words in my mind. Did they really think they were responsible for my success? That the years I spent working late nights, taking risks, and planning carefully were somehow owed to them? I started thinking back to all the moments when I'd asked for help growing up, moments when I was brushed off because they were too busy with Lily's events, Josh's projects, or Madison's latest artistic phase. I ignored Lily's text, but the sting stayed with me. The next family gathering, I tried to bring it up, just lightly, hoping to have a real conversation. I mentioned that I felt a little taken for granted, and, to my surprise, they all laughed it off. Josh put a hand on my shoulder and said, "Don't worry, man. We know you're not like us. You're steady, practical. You'll always have our backs." I walked away from that gathering feeling hollow. I'd been giving so much of myself to a family that didn't see me, didn't respect me, and certainly didn't care about my own dreams or my accomplishments. I'd become nothing more than the family bank, the steady one. The quiet kid who'd grown up to fund everyone else's lives. And worst of all, they were starting to expect it. I decided then and there that things had to change. No more feeling like the overlooked sibling. No more letting them decide my value based on how much I could give. But as I would soon find out, breaking free from a lifetime of family expectations wasn't going to be easy. After that realization, I started making some small changes. I stopped immediately jumping at every request from my family. No more instant transfers when Josh's business took another dive. No more last-minute payments on Lily's condo. And definitely no more covering Madison's art studio rent in some trendy part of town. It wasn't like I was cutting them off completely. I just wanted them to see I had boundaries. But if I thought they'd accept that quietly, I was dead wrong. First, there was the confusion. At family dinners, they'd hint about financial problems, expecting me to swoop in like usual. When I didn't bite, I got the puzzled looks, the quiet sighs. My mom, bless her, tried the guilt trip. "Nathan, you know how hard it's been for your siblings. They don't have the stability you do." And yeah, that one stung a little, but I held firm. I wasn't about to be guilted back into enabling their every whim. Then, confusion turned into annoyance. Josh outright asked me if I'd forgotten the transfer I usually sent him. He said it like it was something expected, like I was late on a utility bill. When I reminded him that I'd been helping them for years and maybe they could try standing on their own, his response was priceless. He said, "Nathan, come on. You're the one with the reliable income. We all thought you understood your role in the family." My role? Apparently, my role was to keep my family's finances afloat. And the more I pushed back, the more that resentment started to bubble to the surface. A few weeks later, I overheard a conversation that really sealed it for me. It was at a family barbecue, and I just stepped inside to grab another drink when I heard Lily talking to Josh in the kitchen. They were laughing, and the conversation turned to me. Josh was saying something about how I wouldn't be anywhere without the family's help, and Lily, with that self-satisfied tone she always had, added, "It's funny how he thinks he's the successful one. We're the reason he even made it. If it weren't for us, he'd probably still be working some IT job." It's hard to describe the feeling. Like someone punched me right in the gut. Here I was, working my ass off, helping them out, and they thought I owed it to them? That I was somehow less because I'd chosen a different path? I tried to let it go, but every time I saw them after that, I could feel this wall of resentment building. I couldn't pretend anymore. I started to pull back even more, not just financially, but emotionally. If they only saw me as the family wallet, maybe it was time I stepped out of that role. But that's when things took a nastier turn. One afternoon, I got a call from a friend who lives in town. He sounded uneasy. "Hey man, I didn't know if I should bring this up, but there's a rumor going around about your business." Apparently, someone had been talking, suggesting that my company was involved in some shady practices. They'd been saying that my success came from cutting corners, maybe even engaging in some not-so-legal activities. It sounded absurd, and my friend admitted he didn't believe a word of it. But the fact that he'd heard it at all meant the story was spreading. The only people who'd know enough about me to start something like that were my own family. I confronted Josh first. I don't know why I started with him. Maybe because I thought he'd be the least likely to lie outright to my face. I pulled him aside during another family gathering and asked him straight up if he'd been talking about my business. He laughed, actually laughed, and said, "Come on, Nathan. You know people talk. Don't take everything so seriously." He tried to act like it was no big deal, just harmless gossip, but the way he brushed it off made me see red. I wanted to scream, to demand he explain why he'd stooped to spreading rumors about his own brother. But I kept my cool, said something vague, and walked away, leaving him there with that stupid smirk on his face. But it didn't stop there. Lily chimed in a few days later with one of her concerned sister phone calls. She called to tell me that people were starting to wonder about my business and that maybe it was time I reconsidered my priorities. "It's not a good look for the family," she said, like I was somehow bringing them down by existing outside their control. I couldn't believe it. Here I was, helping them every month without a second thought, and they were trying to ruin the one thing I'd built for myself. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her exactly what I thought, but all I could say was, "Thanks for the advice, Lily." I hung up and just sat there, feeling the bitterness build up in my throat. The thing is, I'd always known my family was complicated, even selfish at times. But I never thought they'd actually try to sabotage me, especially after everything I'd done for them. It was like they couldn't stand the thought of me being more successful than them. Like I was supposed to be their quiet little support system, never stepping out of line or daring to shine brighter than they did. The rumor only got worse from there. I started getting odd questions from clients, people asking about things they'd heard through the grapevine. I had to do serious damage control, reminding everyone of my company's stellar reputation and the strict standards we upheld. Luckily, my clients knew me well enough to trust me, but it was exhausting and humiliating. I couldn't believe I was defending myself against my own family's attacks. After that, I knew I had to draw the line. I decided to stop all financial support. Not just cut it down, but stop completely. They didn't appreciate it anyway, and I was tired of being the golden goose that they could just bleed dry. I told myself they'd finally see that I was serious, that they'd realize they couldn't manipulate me anymore. Of course, that's not what happened. The next day, I got a barrage of messages. Lily, Josh, my parents, everyone was calling, texting, asking why the money hadn't come in. I let their messages sit for a few hours before finally responding, telling them simply that I was done. If they wanted help, they'd have to figure it out themselves. The reaction was explosive. Lily called me selfish, ungrateful, and accused me of abandoning them when they needed me most. Josh went on a tirade about how he'd counted on that money for a big investment and that I'd screwed him over. My mother called, crying, asking why I was being so heartless. And my dad, who rarely ever got involved in these things, left me a voicemail that made it clear he thought I was betraying the family by refusing to support them. For the first time, I realized they didn't see me as a person. They saw me as an endless supply of cash. And the worst part? They actually believed they deserved it. After days of accusations, I stopped responding altogether. I needed a break. I needed to get my head straight and figure out what to do next. But it seemed like my family wasn't done. They weren't about to let me go so easily. And little did I know, they had one more surprise in store for me. One that would push me to a breaking point I didn't even know I had. The seeds of betrayal were firmly planted, and I knew this was far from over. The worst, it seemed, was yet to come. The first few days after I stopped the money flow were quiet, eerily so. I thought maybe they'd accepted it, maybe realized I'd finally put my foot down. But, of course, I should have known better. The silence was just the calm before the storm. On the fourth day, I got a text from my mom, saying, "Nathan, we need to talk. Family meeting this Sunday." No greeting, no question, just a direct statement, like I was being summoned. I should have ignored it, but a part of me, the part that still wanted to believe in my family, decided to go. Maybe I thought they'd finally understand, or maybe I just wanted some closure. Either way, that Sunday, I found myself walking into my parents' living room, where everyone was already waiting. The second I sat down, it started. Josh launched into a rant about how he'd lost a major investment opportunity because he was counting on my support. Lily chimed in, listing all the expenses she'd racked up expecting my usual help. Madison was quieter but looked at me with this hurt expression, like I'd personally betrayed her. And my parents just sat there, watching it all unfold, not a single word of support for me. I tried to keep calm, to explain that my support had always been a gift, not an obligation. I told them I'd helped because I wanted to, but that I'd realized I couldn't keep doing it at the expense of my own well-being. My voice was steady, but inside I was seething, waiting for even one of them to acknowledge what I was saying. That's when my dad finally spoke up. His tone was low, disappointed. "Nathan, family looks out for each other. I don't understand why you're being so selfish now. You've always been the one we could count on." Selfish. That word hit me like a punch to the gut. Here I was, breaking my back to support them for years, and the one time I put up a boundary, they called me selfish. I'd always thought family meant looking out for each other, but apparently, that only applied when it benefited them. Finally, I snapped. I stood up and looked each one of them in the eyes, something I'd rarely done in these meetings, as I'd usually just sit there and take it. But this time, I had had enough. "No, I'm not selfish. You are. All of you," I said, my voice steady. "I've been giving and giving for years, but none of you ever once thought about what I needed. I'm not a bank, and I'm done pretending to be." I don't know what reaction I expected. Shock, maybe, or a moment of self-reflection. Instead, Lily scoffed. "Oh, come on, Nathan. You act like you're some saint. You wouldn't even be successful if we hadn't been there for you all these years. Mom and Dad practically raised you to be this successful. And now you're just going to walk away from all of us?" Josh chimed in, nodding. "Yeah, man. We all made sacrifices for each other. But I guess we know where you stand now. Just because you have a bit of money, you think you're better than us?" That's when my mom added, "We didn't raise you to be so ungrateful, Nathan." I couldn't even respond. I just stared at them, feeling like I was seeing my family for the first time. All those years of thinking I was helping, of believing I was supporting them, and here they were, twisting it into some twisted narrative that I owed them my success, my money, my everything. Without another word, I turned and walked out, my mom's tearful pleas following me down the hall. But I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I just got in my car and drove away, not knowing where I was going, just needing to get as far from them as possible. Over the next few days, I tried to piece myself back together. It felt like my whole world had been flipped upside down. The people I'd thought I was closest to had turned out to be strangers, cold, demanding, strangers who felt entitled to everything I'd worked for. The betrayal cut deeper than I could put into words, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly alone. But then, in a twist I didn't see coming, an unexpected ally reached out. I'd almost forgotten about Olivia, an old family friend who'd once dated Josh. We hadn't been close, but we'd always gotten along. She sent me a message saying she'd heard about the family fallout and that she wanted to talk. I was hesitant, wary of anything remotely connected to my family, but curiosity won out. I agreed to meet her for coffee. When we met, I was surprised to see genuine concern in her eyes. She started by apologizing for even bringing it up, but said she'd felt compelled to reach out after hearing what had happened. We started talking, and as the conversation flowed, I realized she understood my family dynamics far better than I'd expected. "I don't know how to say this," she said, stirring her coffee, "but your family has a way of manipulating people. Josh, especially. I know it might not be my place, but I think they've been taking advantage of you for years, and maybe you didn't see it because, well, they're family." Her words struck a chord. I'd always suspected that they were using me, but hearing someone else say it made it feel real. We talked for hours, and she shared stories of her own, about how Josh had used her financially during their relationship, always promising things he never delivered. She'd seen firsthand how my family's pattern of entitlement had damaged her own life, and now she was watching them do the same to me. With Olivia's encouragement, I started going through my finances, tracking just how much I'd given to my family over the years. It was staggering. Tens of thousands of dollars that I'd poured into their lives, their whims, their projects. It was a harsh realization, but I needed to see it, to understand just how much of myself I'd given away without expecting anything in return. Olivia didn't just sympathize, she helped me strategize. We came up with a plan for setting boundaries, both financial and emotional, so that I could protect myself going forward. I'd thought I was standing strong by cutting them off, but she showed me that I'd only taken the first step. If I really wanted to move on, I had to close every door that led back to them. Then, in another unexpected twist, Olivia introduced me to a lawyer friend of hers, James. He was specialized in family law and financial disputes, and he offered to help me protect my assets in case my family tried anything extreme. I wasn't sure what extreme meant, but after everything, I knew better than to think they'd back down without a fight. James reviewed some documents and, to my shock, discovered something unsettling. Apparently, Josh had attempted to take out a loan in my name a few months back. It hadn't gone through because the bank flagged it for verification, but the fact that he'd even tried left me speechless. I realized then that my family had crossed a line I couldn't ignore. They weren't just pushing boundaries, they were actively trying to take from me, with or without my permission. Armed with this new knowledge, I felt a strange calm settle over me. It was like a fog had lifted, and I could finally see my family for who they were. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but with Olivia and James by my side, I felt stronger than I had in years. I was finally ready to confront them, not just with words, but with proof of everything they'd done. The betrayal ran deep, but I wasn't going to let it ruin me. Not anymore. And as I prepared to face my family one last time, I knew this wasn't just about money or boundaries. This was about reclaiming my life, my identity, and my worth, after years of being told that I was nothing more than their golden goose. The more I thought about it, the more determined I became to finally confront my family with all the evidence I had. I wasn't going to let them keep manipulating me, but this time, I wasn't going in alone. Olivia and James both insisted they'd be there to support me, which gave me a confidence I hadn't felt in a long time. I wasn't just a pawn in my family's game anymore. I was about to take control for once. The day of the confrontation, Olivia suggested we meet at her place, a neutral ground where my family might actually listen instead of defaulting to their usual tricks. I'd notified my family that I wanted to meet to discuss a few unresolved matters. The message was vague, but they all showed up, likely thinking I'd had a change of heart and was ready to apologize for cutting them off. They arrived with their usual airs, though their expressions shifted when they saw Olivia and James sitting beside me. My parents seemed uneasy, Lily, suspicious. Josh had that smirk plastered on his face, the one he wore whenever he thought he was holding all the cards. I had to fight to keep my cool as they settled in, acting as if they were indulging me by coming at all. I started with the basics. I told them I knew about the rumors they'd been spreading and how it had affected my business. My mother blinked, as if surprised I'd figured it out, but Josh shrugged it off, saying, "Oh, come on, Nathan. People talk. We can't control what they say." I shook my head, finally feeling the anger bubble up. "No, Josh. You started those rumors. Don't act like you're innocent here. I'm not blind to what's been happening." For the first time, he looked taken aback, the smirk slipping just slightly, but he quickly recovered. I continued, laying out all the evidence I'd gathered over the years, the months of payments I'd made to cover their debts, the loans I'd paid off, and the extravagant expenses they'd splurged on, all on my dime. I even had screenshots of texts where they'd joked about their personal golden goose. Lily's face turned red as she glanced at the screen, and my parents shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances. But Josh just crossed his arms, watching me with narrowed eyes. Then, with a deep breath, I handed the floor to James. He presented the bank documents showing Josh's attempted loan application in my name. Josh's face went pale as the color drained from him, and he stammered, trying to deny it. But James wasn't done. He had more, including records showing that Josh had been using my social security number in various applications, which could have severely damaged my credit had it gone through. Attempted fraud, James said, looking directly at Josh. If this had gone through, it would be grounds for legal action. Josh's voice wavered, but he tried to keep his composure. Nathan, come on. We're family. I didn't think it would be a big deal. I needed the money, and you've got more than enough. There it was, the entitlement laid bare. He thought he was entitled to take from me, without my permission, without my knowledge, because we were family. I felt a wave of both anger and sadness wash over me. After all these years, after everything I'd given, they still thought I owed them everything. My mother, finally grasping the severity of the situation, started pleading. Nathan, honey, please don't do this. We're your family. We love you. This is just a misunderstanding. I could tell she was panicking, seeing the possibility of her comfortable lifestyle slipping away. But it was too late. I couldn't unsee who they really were. Olivia stepped in then, her voice firm and calm. This isn't about family, Mrs. Davenport. This is about respect. Nathan has supported all of you for years, and you didn't just take advantage of it. You tried to exploit him. That's not love. Lily turned on Olivia, scoffing. Oh, look who's talking. The ex-girlfriend who's only here because she couldn't move on. Do you really think you have any place in this family? Her voice was dripping with contempt, as if Olivia was beneath her. But Olivia didn't back down. Actually, Lily, I'm here because I care about Nathan and don't want to see him hurt anymore. And I don't need your approval for that. The tension in the room was thick, and I could tell that for the first time. My family felt like they were on the defensive. I think they expected me to eventually cave in, like I always had, but this time, I was prepared to see it through. I stood up and looked at each of them, the people who were supposed to be my family, but who had betrayed me in ways I hadn't even imagined. I'm done. I'm not just cutting you off financially. I'm cutting you out of my life until you learn what it means to respect someone. You took advantage of me, tried to ruin my reputation, and still acted like I was in the wrong. This ends here. My dad, silent until that point, tried a different tactic, softer this time. Nathan, don't be hasty. We can work this out. We're a family, and families stick together through tough times. But I was done with the emotional manipulation. I wasn't going to fall for their tricks anymore. If you valued family, you wouldn't have done any of this to me in the first place, I replied, my voice shaking with the intensity of everything I was feeling. After a few tense moments of silence, they realized I wasn't going to back down. My mother started crying, and Lily looked furious. Josh muttered something under his breath, his face twisted with anger, but he didn't look me in the eye. They left, one by one, each of them hurling various accusations about how I was selfish, heartless, and ungrateful. But for the first time, their words didn't affect me. I felt free, like I was finally breathing fresh air after years of suffocation. After they left, I sat with Olivia and James, feeling a strange mixture of relief and sadness. I'd always hoped that my family would change, that one day they'd see me as more than a tool to be used. But they hadn't, and now I was finally ready to move on without them. Over the next few weeks, I began rebuilding my life, but this time with strong boundaries in place. I set up financial protections so that none of my family could access my assets again. Olivia was a constant source of support, helping me through the waves of doubt and guilt that inevitably came up, reminding me that I deserved respect and that I'd done the right thing. I also got a call from Madison, the only one who hadn't spoken during the confrontation. She apologized for not standing up for me and admitted she'd been scared of losing my support. I didn't know if I could fully trust her, but I appreciated the honesty. We talked for a while, and she admitted she felt trapped, unable to pursue her dreams without my help but unwilling to challenge the family dynamics. She promised to keep her distance and give me the space I needed, and I told her that, if she genuinely wanted to change, I'd be open to a relationship down the line. But for now, I needed time. Olivia and I grew closer, and I realized she understood me in ways my family never had. She'd seen their manipulative tactics firsthand, had experienced their entitlement and judgment, and still wanted to be there for me. It wasn't long before our friendship turned into something deeper, something I hadn't thought I'd find amidst all this chaos. Then, in a surprising twist, An anonymous blog post started circulating online about family betrayal and the hidden toxicity of people who demand unearned loyalty. It didn't mention me by name, but it was clearly about my story. I suspected Olivia might have written it, but she swore she hadn't. Regardless of who posted it, the response was overwhelming. Thousands of people commented, sharing their own stories of family manipulation and thanking the writer for speaking out. It felt strangely cathartic to read their stories, to know that I wasn't alone in this. Finally, I could see a future without my family's suffocating expectations weighing me down. I had Olivia, newfound respect for myself, and a clearer understanding of what I wanted in my life. The family I'd spent my life trying to support had tried to bring me down, but I'd survived it. And for the first time, I felt like I could thrive, free from their grip. The weeks that followed felt like the beginning of a new chapter, though I'd be lying if I said it wasn't a hard transition. The absence of my family left a void I hadn't expected. Even though they'd hurt me, they'd been my reality for so long. Now, for the first time, I had to rebuild without them. Luckily, Olivia and James were there every step of the way, keeping me grounded whenever I started to second-guess myself. One morning, a letter showed up at my office. No return address, no name. Inside was a handwritten note from my dad. His words were cautious, almost formal, as he explained that he didn't agree with how things had ended. He claimed that families should always put differences aside, and he hoped I would reconsider. He didn't apologize, didn't acknowledge any wrongdoing, just this vague appeal to reconnect. It was the same tactic they'd used for years. No real accountability, just a call for me to return to the role they'd assigned me, the dutiful provider. I put the letter away without responding. There were too many wounds left unhealed, too many issues left unaddressed. For the first time in my life, I was choosing peace over appeasement, and that decision felt both empowering and terrifying. I knew that reconnecting on their terms would only reopen old wounds. I had to stay strong, even if part of me ached to believe they'd changed. Over time, I started receiving updates from distant relatives. It turned out that my decision had sent ripples through the extended family. People I hadn't heard from in years reached out, some supportive, others curious, asking if it was true that I'd walked away. It was as if I'd become a cautionary tale, the one who dared to stand up and say no. But even with the gossip swirling around, I felt more free and grounded than ever. Then, something unexpected happened. About 3 months after cutting off my family, I was approached by a small local news outlet. They'd seen the anonymous blog post about my story and wanted to interview me. Initially, I hesitated. Part of me feared the repercussions of going public. My family could retaliate, spin their own narrative, or even try to challenge me legally. But Olivia encouraged me to consider it, not as revenge, but as a way of finally reclaiming my voice. With her support, I agreed to an anonymous interview. I told my story honestly, from my struggles with feeling overlooked to my family's entitlement and manipulation. I didn't mention names, but I was candid about the emotional toll it had taken. The interview was published with the title, "When Family Crosses the Line: One Man's Journey to Self-Respect." The response was overwhelming. People reached out, sharing their own experiences, and for the first time, I felt understood. My story was no longer just a burden I carried alone. It had become a source of strength for others. The reaction was bigger than I'd anticipated. The piece gained traction online, going semi-viral as readers shared it widely. I started receiving emails from people in similar situations, some of whom thanked me for helping them recognize their own worth. I even heard from a few former friends of my family who privately told me they'd always suspected the golden child narrative had been manipulated. And then, one day, I received a message from someone unexpected, Madison. She apologized for how she'd let things go on, admitting that she'd been too afraid to stand up against the family's expectations. She'd read the interview, and it had struck a nerve. "I know I didn't defend you," she wrote, "and I'm sorry. You didn't deserve any of it. I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I realized how much I let them control me, too." She asked if we could meet for coffee, just to talk. When we met, she was nervous, clearly struggling to find the right words. She told me that seeing everything laid out in the interview had forced her to confront her own role in the family dynamic. She hadn't actively participated in the manipulation, but she also hadn't stopped it. Madison admitted that she'd always envied my independence, but had been too afraid to pursue her own. We talked for hours, and by the end, I felt a tentative sense of closure. I wasn't ready to fully trust her again, but I appreciated her honesty. A few weeks later, I got word that Josh's latest business venture had failed spectacularly. He tried to get investors using inflated figures and promises, which didn't pan out, leaving him in debt. Without my financial support to bail him out, he was struggling. I thought I'd feel satisfied hearing it, but instead, I just felt free. His problems were no longer my responsibility. I didn't need to worry about cleaning up his messes anymore. Lily had gone mostly silent after our confrontation. I found out she tried to paint herself as a victim to some family friends, but they didn't buy it. She'd lost her steady supply of easy money, and the lifestyle she'd built on it was starting to crumble. I wouldn't be surprised if she reached out eventually, but for now, she kept her distance, which was exactly what I wanted. Through all of this, Olivia remained by my side, and our bond only grew stronger. I realized she was the first person in a long time who truly saw me for who I was, not for what I could give. We spent more time together, supporting each other, and before I knew it, what had started as a rekindling of friendship grew into something more. We hadn't planned on it, but sometimes, life has a way of surprising you. Olivia became my rock, and I realized I was happier than I'd ever been, without the weight of my family's expectations dragging me down. As I rebuilt my life, I found new friends and formed genuine connections with people who valued me for myself. I took time for hobbies I'd neglected, traveled to places I'd always wanted to see, and focused on expanding my business in ways that aligned with my values, not with the pressures I'd carried for so long. One day, as I was clearing out some old emails, I came across a voicemail from my mother, left weeks after our confrontation. She sounded broken, desperate, pleading for a chance to make things right. I debated for a moment, my finger hovering over the play button, but then, with a deep breath, I deleted it. I didn't need to hear her words to know that my decision had been the right one. I was finally free, finally choosing myself after years of putting everyone else first. Looking back, I can see that my family had always treated me as an asset, a resource to be tapped whenever they needed something. They didn't see me as a person with my own dreams, boundaries, or needs. And while it hurt to walk away, I knew I'd made the right choice. I'd paid for their whims, supported their lifestyles, and in return, they tried to erase everything I'd built. I still get the occasional message from extended family or an old friend asking if I'll ever make amends with my family. But for me, amends aren't about forgetting what they did. They're about learning to stand tall and honoring the boundaries I fought so hard to establish. I'm no longer the quiet, overlooked kid in the corner. I'm the man who chose to walk away, to value myself, and to reclaim my life from the people who tried to drain it dry. And for the first time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Little did I know, this was just the beginning.